If your company has a compliance program, then your company needs compliance training. If you want your program to be a success, that training needs to be the best. Join Shawn Rogers and Tom Fox on Excellence in Training and learn just how good compliance training can be.
Hello, everyone. Tom Fox and Shawn Rogers back for another episode of Excellence in Training. Today, we're going to take a look at taking a holistic approach to your compliance training through establishing governance across your entire risk universe. So, Shawn, first of all, welcome back.
Hi, Tom. Thank you.
So, Shawn, I would say that in terms of large organizations, you certainly qualify as working for a large organization.
Yeah.
But as many large multinational companies face legal compliance and regulatory risk literally across multiple jurisdictions, multiple states, multiple countries across the globe, often many of those risks are owned by corporate disciplines outside of the compliance function. So I was wondering if you might give us some thoughts on how a company can create a comprehensive training program that covers really its entire risk profile, literally across the globe.
Well, Tom, you've absolutely nailed it. This is a huge challenge for a company the size of General Motors or any other multinational company. And I think it's probably a problem that's faced by many companies. A large company will inevitably have a broad risk portfolio, like you mentioned, and typically most of those risks are not owned by the compliance function. This presents a real challenge when you're trying to create a comprehensive compliance training program that covers all of the legal and regulatory risks that a company faces. To illustrate this challenge, consider some of the companies that have been in the headlines recently. First, we all know about Walmart. Their issues were not related to, those issues were related to one of the most traditional compliance risks, which is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. But if you look at the broader portfolio, many other companies have faced risks that come in out of the blue from another one of these disciplines, and they're not related to a risk that's owned by corporate compliance. Look at Boeing, for example. They're in hot water right now, but their issues are with the safety of its airliners. I can almost guarantee that the product safety risk is not directly owned by the corporate compliance function. Then you've got Facebook with their recent issues related to data privacy. That risk is probably owned by a separate privacy function. So how do you create a risk-based compliance training program that addresses all of a company's legal and regulatory risks, including the risks that are, quote, owned outside of the established compliance function? That's a challenge that I faced here at GM and at other companies where I've worked and been associated with. And so one possible approach that you might consider is to establish a governance function, a corporate compliance training governance committee that looks at the company's overall risk profile and then builds a cross-functional and comprehensive multi-year training plan. This would effectively address the risks outside of the traditional risks of the compliance function and includes all of the risks in the company's risk portfolio. And this is exactly what we've tried to do at GM with some degree of success.
So, Shawn, I think we've had this discussion before, but as you know, I'm a big process guy, and part of any process is to put a second set of eyes on the entire process. And it strikes me that in your brief description of government structure oversight, you're really providing at least part of that second set of eyes. So I would certainly see that as an advantage, but from a more on the ground or granular perspective that you're in on your day-to-day work, what do you see as the advantages of having such a formal structure in place?
I think the biggest advantage is the cooperation that you get and the fact that you end up with a program that truly covers all of the company's main compliance risks. In other words, you establish truly a risk-based program, and that phrase risk-based is something you'll commonly hear when you hear of guidance from the regulators. When you get the people together, they all understand that they have individual risks, but they don't always see how it fits into the overall company risk profile. You know, when you bring the stakeholders in from safety, for example, they understand that their risk topic is vitally important, but then they also see that there are other company risks that are equally or more important. And this will lead to a negotiated and coordinated solution for the risk managers. It also tends to lead to a measured and balanced program for the learning audience if you map it out over several years. So another advantage is that you can drive standards. This is the challenge that we've had before I came on board. One of the biggest frustrations for learners is taking multiple required courses. And again, I'm talking only about online courses in this podcast. And these courses are all done by different vendors. And they have different interfaces and different approaches to presenting the material. With a governance team, you can get together and agree to use perhaps all the same vendor or a couple of good vendors. You can agree which languages the courses should be translated into. You can use similar presentation styles. And you can also thereby present a united learning front to your entire learning audience. And then finally, one thing we found is that it eliminates some redundancy across the courses, and it allows for some cross-course coordination. When you really delve into an overall risk profile, you'll see that there's overlap, for example, between data privacy and cybersecurity and information and lifecycle management. You see that there are some common themes that flow across those courses. And when you get the stakeholders all together in a governance format or program, then they can also leverage each other and eliminate some of those redundancies across the courses. So those are just a few of the advantages that we've discovered to having a more formalized governance structure here at GM.
Shawn, it almost sounds like one of the, if not tactics or strategies, but the results of having that formal governance structure in place is it allows you to literally map your training across various corporate disciplines, but also across various corporate risks. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, it is. You get the ability to really map out your training in a logical, coordinated way so that you can cover all of your risks over a period of time. I think one of the mistakes we often make is that we try to do all the training all at once and we overwhelm our learners with these annual requirements. And so it certainly is an advantage that brings coordination to the overall program and shows a sense of unity.
So, Shawn, I've known you quite some time, and you've had roles in compliance at companies that are much smaller than your current employer. In those companies, was this training mapping really just in someone's head? It wasn't formalized or at least reduced to writing so it could be documented?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Until I got to GM, the corporate compliance function really owned the training curriculum, even to the point of sometimes setting up their own learning management system. And it was very centralized and very driven. But as I found in a larger corporation, if you do that, you can become siloed. And being siloed is never a good thing. And you get these pockets of training that pop up throughout the company. And there's no coordination. Once you hit a certain scale or size of a company, you'll find that training springs up all over the place. And so we tried to get our hands around it by forming this governance function. And there's been a lot of other advantages that have come out of it as well.
I have to say, Shawn, you've almost got me scared enough thinking if you don't have this structure in place, you really have no idea. There could be multiple training going on multiple tracks and no real coordination. If it's not in one person's head, no one really knows the entire spectrum of training inside your own organization.
That's very true. And you can layer on multiple levels of requirements and it becomes very confusing. And then also another side effect of that is that you have gaps. Not everybody gets the message that a certain course is required. And then when it comes down to being audited or reviewed, you find that you didn't cover your entire risk audience and you may have created the problem for yourself.
Well, Shawn, what are your thoughts on perhaps setting up a cross-functional governance team? And once you have those members selected, how do you actually, how does the committee run the governance or at least oversee the governance program?
That was a challenge I faced here at GM, but they had partially solved it by setting up a loose governance function. And the thing that they had done that was quite brilliant, in my opinion, was they had put co-chairmen in place. They had identified two people to be the leaders. And those two people here were the chief compliance officer and the chief talent officer, the person in charge of talent development, reporting into the HR function. And so I think the first thing you do is identify two leaders. And The unique chemistry that came into the governance function when we picked those two leaders were that you had the corporate compliance officer or the chief compliance officer who could look at training holistically from a compliance and risk perspective. Then the talent officer was able to look at training from a training discipline perspective and bring the training eye to the committee, which give us the ability to really take a balanced approach across both the legal and compliance spectrum and also the learning spectrum. And so once you get your leaders in place, then the trick is to identify the right individuals that reside in the various functions that own your risks, and to get the right people in the committee to represent those functions and those risks. For GM, that meant that we selected representatives from the compliance organization, obviously, but we also reached out to product safety, workplace safety, information technology, data privacy, human resources, marketing, and then the broader legal organization. These were the people that were typically charged with training responsibilities in those organizations. And they were either serving as a subject matter expert or they were well connected to the other subject matter experts within the organization. So they knew what those organizations were trying to accomplish, and they knew those organizations' objectives. And then finally, it's important that you don't forget the individuals that are in supporting functions. And what I mean by supporting functions, those are the functions that run your learning management platform and the reports that are generated from the platform. And also the communications team that's responsible for generating emails and professional communications and internal articles that help you promote your training program and your training campaigns. So you get representatives from both supporting functions and the risk owning functions together in one room, and you'll be amazed at some of the creative solutions that can come out of discussions with those individuals.
So it really sounds like, I guess the thing that struck me about this, Shawn, is I'd originally thought this was really just a second level of review or second set of eyes, but now that I see this as a much more robust, structured approach to really the entire scope of not only training, but even risk management within your organization, really from a little bit different perspective and with a little bit different focus that gives you even more information to deliver a risk management solution.
Absolutely. And what we found is these individuals have really adopted a sense of ownership for the overall portfolio and not just the specific risks they bring to the table. And so getting all these people together, there's been a synchronicity of talents and some really interesting and innovative approaches to what have been legacy training problems and training dilemmas of the company.
So there was one point I did want to raise with you. It's a little bit perhaps off base, but it's always stuck with me from my corporate days. And I work for a major oilfield service company, and we received a notice that I think it was on a Wednesday. By Friday, you had to have completed your training module for the following issue: argon being released from your fireplace. Now,
okay.
I lived in Houston. I lived in an apartment. I did not have a fireplace. When I lived in a home with a fireplace, it was a wood-burning fireplace. And I will freely admit I did not know argon was released from wood-burning fireplaces. But you've used another phrase for that. And the word came down, you absolutely positively had to do it. It was mandatory, and we were never told why.
Right.
But that comes close to what I think you call a rogue course. So I was wondering if you just might end with a few thoughts on rogue courses and how they work to the actually detriment of your overall compliance training regime, and how a committee like this can help really swat those down, or at least pull them back so that they're presented to the people who really do need to understand the dangers of argon poisoning.
Great question. And this is one of those unknown problems, unless you've been in this situation trying to run a training program globally, that you've probably never faced. But yes, I call these rogue training courses, and they're always courses that are very, very valuable and very important to the risk owning function and to a certain aspect of the company. However, as you pointed out, almost universally when these courses crop up, they do not apply to every single individual in the company. And that's one of the mandates of our training governance function, is to look at what topics everybody that has a GM badge needs to know. And so when these rogue courses pop up, the governance team is there as a backstop. And what we do is we say, you know what, you've got a great idea for a course. Let's look at our criteria for a global course to make sure that it really fits the fundamental requirements. And if it doesn't, let's connect you with the right individuals in the company that can help you with your challenge of target audiencing that course in such a way that it gets to the right people. Now, one of two things will happen. When they come in and see what the governance process does, they'll say, oh, you know what, my course doesn't apply to everybody globally, and it doesn't need to be translated into 9 languages. Oh, I don't need to have an expensive training vendor develop this for me. But you know what, maybe we can slip this topic into next year's code of conduct course, or maybe next year, like with your argon gassing, you can slip in a topic in a note or a resources section of the safety course. And so it not only kind of swats these down from becoming an all-employee training campaign outside of the required training program, but it also gives them a venue to find some assistance in getting their message out in an alternative way. And that has been surprisingly valuable when people have come to us and said, you know, we have this course and it's just got to go to everybody. And we say, okay, let's take a step back and let's talk about it. And maybe it does. And if it doesn't, we'll help you find a way to get your message out. And that's been a very, very valuable aspect of having the governance committee in place.
Well, Shawn, this has really been a fascinating exploration and, frankly, fascinating education for me about establishing governance across the risk universe and how that can go down to the granularity level of individual badged employees who may need a specific course. So thanks again for taking the time to visit with me.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you so much. Hi, this is Shawn Rogers. In these podcasts, I'm not speaking on behalf of my company in any way. I'm sharing my own thoughts, my own experiences, and my own opinions. And I'm certainly not endorsing any specific vendors that my company is currently using or has used in the past. I'm certainly not disparaging any vendor or any other company's compliance training program. I'm doing this out of an effort to promote and encourage continuous improvement across the profession. I really hope that in some small way, these podcasts will generate ideas that will be helpful. Thank you for giving me this platform that adds my voice to a very important and worthwhile topic.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Excellence in Training. Help get the word out by rating us and leaving a review.